Before we get into the episode today, I just wanted to kind of discuss a little bit about the topic at hand. We're going to be obviously discussing injuries and such, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how to manage those injuries and what we should do when we are injured. And though a lot of it's going to possibly involve like exercises and health recommendations and such. And all I really want to say is if you've been dealing with an injury for an extended period of time and it continues to flare up, and you don't know what's going on, you don't know all the details, you may not be as educated on the subject, I would highly recommend that you go and get the problem confirmed and checked out by a professional, either like a physical therapist or a medical professional of some sort, because the path to recovery is a lot easier when you understand what's actually going on. Now, just because you go to the doctor or the physical therapist, whatever the case is, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will have the solution for you. But when you do understand, okay, this is what's wrong with me, this is strained, or this is broken, et cetera, and you get the things told to you by somebody who knows what they're looking at, well, then the path towards recovery is a lot more clear. So that's just something that I really wanted to say out here before we get into like the majority of the podcast. If you guys have been following the podcast for a while and you want to support me, go ahead and check out the Patreon below. We got a ton of goodies on there, tons of goodies coming, and that's going to be really appreciated to help me with my jiu-jitsu training. So with a further case, let's get into the podcast. Hey, so what's going on, everybody? It is Jason here with the White to Black Belt podcast. Very excited to be discussing today about a topic that I'm sure a lot of people struggle with in the community. And it's unfortunate that I also have to bring up a part of the topic of which I am flaring up with my injury that I've been dealing with over the past month. And that's been a intercostal rib musculature injury and strain. It's been a huge pain in the ass. It was recovering for a while, and then we did that competition. And when I did that competition, no doubt things started to re-flare up. And it definitely got re-aggravated, unfortunately, which is really frustrating. You know, jiu-jitsu is one of my favorite things to do. And I have a lot of goals in jiu-jitsu. And I really feel like I was seeing a lot of success in jiu-jitsu. I feel like that I've been progressing really, really fast as of recently. And I've been really happy with it. But unfortunately, some things happened where you have to take a break from training. And that's kind of what I'm accepted, that probably over the next 2 to 4 weeks, it's going to be like very minimal training. And so essentially what I'm going to be doing is just mainly sticking to drilling and maybe light rounds with people that are a lot lighter than me, that are a lot less skilled than me, but also people that I trust, people in my immediate training circle that I train with at the gym that are that I know aren't going to spaz out and do random things and that are going to hurt me. You know, the people that are looking out for me. And this is something that I think is super important when it comes to jiu-jitsu, is having like a trustworthy squad behind you when you're training. Even if you're just somebody who's like not even trying to compete, maybe you're just a hobbyist, or if you are trying to compete and you're trying to compete at the highest level that you can. I am a huge believer, especially with jiu-jitsu, that the team is everything, and who you have in your corner is everything. And I think that what helps this the most is your ability to communicate with other people. Because if you come from a place of respect and niceness and politeness, and you don't try to be a fucking asshole to people, then people are going to want to train with you, and you're going to be able to become more friendly with people. Now, I will say this. Sometimes being a friendly individual and being nice to people, some people, for whatever reason, it just doesn't vibe with them. I think it has to do something with maybe the trauma that they've dealt with in their life and the way that they respond to people that are nice to them, because maybe they had bad experiences in the past of someone being really nice to them and then maybe stabbing them in the back, and it kind of like put up a wall in some people's way. But I find in those situations that those people are usually just like, it can be a little bit toxic to be around, and I try to just stay away from those people in general, unless, you know, still stay respectful, still stay nice, but, you know, my main thing is to be respectful and nice to the people that are also looking to be nice and respectful back, because when you get that, that is the ultimate synergy. Really good to look at is like the Daisy Fresh group. Like, look at the Daisy Fresh group. Like, these people to each other are incredibly like non-judgmental. They're nice to each other, they're polite to each other, they're respectful to each other, but they train hard as hell and they train balls to the wall with each other, and they work on helping each other improve. And I think that there is a special bond that happens in the world of jiu-jitsu that comes from people just wanting to train hard together, but also being cognizant of our safety, right? And not making sure that we don't actually like hurt each other and such. I think that's a really critical thing to have. Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate thing about the injury is that it's just unclear, because especially with like the rib area, it just kind of is involved in every single movement that you do, right? And fortunately enough, I believe that it is not a cracked rib or a broken rib or a fractured rib. It's not that painful. Like right now, it doesn't hurt. I can breathe and it doesn't hurt. I sneeze and it doesn't hurt. I cough and it doesn't really hurt. But what definitely does, I definitely do feel it when I like go inverted, or I do like certain positions, or if someone applies too much pressure. And the important thing is that we recognize about these injuries that when we get injured or when we feel an injury occur, is we need to be able to accept the fact that we got injured, and we need to find this balance of not being a total like waste of space and just not doing anything, and not trying to see what you can do and trying to work around the injury, and also ignoring the injury and potentially making it much worse. And I've seen both happen in my career. I've seen both things happen. I see different types of personalities do different types of things. I'm trying to find that balance. I usually tend to be the type of person that even if I'm injured, like I want to go train hard anyway. Like that's just what I do. And that's one of the worst things you can do, because at least if I, let's say, was on the other end of the spectrum and I did nothing for 6 weeks, well, then at least I'm going to recover and maybe I can come back and make it strong. But if I would keep injuring it or keep re-aggravating it, I'm never going to perform at my best anyway. And then I'm going to wind up making it even worse. And then I might even get a fracture, right? So you got to be able to look at that in your own scenarios of like what injuries that you're dealing with. Obviously, there's all different types of injuries that happen to different joints in the body. And, in my years of strength and conditioning, personal training, there's a general rule of thumb that I find to be really important when it comes to dealing with the injury on like a physiological level, right? But you also have the mental side of things. Like, how do you deal with it mentally? Like, what is it that you do? Let me address that first before we go into the physical, because the mental is a little bit quick. From the perspective of like where your mindset should be when you're dealing with an injury, well, firstly, you don't want to knock yourself completely out of the game. I think it's important that even when we are injured, we try to do the best things that we can. Maybe that involves like working out or exercise, right? Maybe that involves like watching matches, studying instructionals, or even just thinking about jiu-jitsu from a place of positional sequences and studying and like writing out flow charts and like getting an idea of what you want to work on when you come back, and maybe like watching the matches that have been happening at the, like, let's say, for instance, like there was just the Pan Ams and the IBJJF tournament, the big ones that have been happening recently. Maybe then would be a good time to spend that time that you would be on jiu-jitsu and to then spend that time watching matches and studying, so that way you can see like what's becoming the new meta, right? That's just an example. I think another thing as far as the mental side is to put that time that you would be doing on jiu-jitsu into other areas of your life. Like, for instance, maybe you have a business that you've always wanted to start it, and you just got hurt, and now it's time to go start that business that you've always wanted to do, or you wanted to start that podcast, or you wanted to go back to school, or you wanted to look into something, right? Use that time for other things that are beneficial, because if you just let yourself rot and waste in space, well, then you're going to get depressed, and it's going to become, your life isn't going to have the quality, and you're always going to be in this like, woe is me, poor me, I can't believe I got injured, and then you adopt this victim mentality, and that's not good. So I think it's important to just kind of use that time to just address other goals and other areas of your life that you might want to work on, I think that can be ultimately one of the best things that you can do. So that way, when you do come back to training, you're coming back with like a clear intention. Like, I've been working on these things. Like, I'm excited to come back, not just from this place of like almost depression when you're not really training and you're not really improving. And then that makes you sad, right? Because we get that dopamine response, and those serotonin hormones hit us when we're progressing at things, when we see ourselves getting better. So if we stop seeing ourselves improve because we can't go train, well, then it's going to lead to us feeling more sad. I know that for me, like, it's a huge bummer to not be able to go and train to the intensity of which that I would like to, because I know that if I were, then I would make my injury worse, and then I wouldn't be able to even move around as freely as I do now. So we have to be grateful for what we do have, and we have to acknowledge the injury and start to put focus and attention into maybe other areas, but also keeping the sport and the techniques fresh in our mind, showing up to class and maybe not training, or maybe just doing light drilling, or maybe just, like I said, watching instructionals or watching matches, I think can be a really crucial step while you're recovering. Then there's the physical aspect of things. Now, the physical aspect of things is quite interesting, because there's actually like a general rule of thumb that you can follow to recover your injuries, right? So one thing that you want to understand, and this kind of comes back to a story of a couple of personal training clients that I used to have. There used to be these personal training clients that had problems with their knees. They were like 30, 40 years old. You know, they didn't do jiu-jitsu. They were just like office workers or whatever. And, you know, they kind of had this knee pain. They went to doctors and stuff, and they got it all checked out. But they're not, they know what's wrong, but they don't actually have like a path to recovery, right? And so one of the things that I've paid attention to, that I've paid attention to in my studies is actually how to rehabilitate those injuries. I'm actually looking to go back to school for physical therapy, because I want to actually become somebody who can clear and be able to say, okay, this is the injury that you do have on a basis. But what I can do now currently is I can take what a like a professional medical doctor or therapist claims to be wrong, and I can say, okay, well, this is the way that we can recover those things, right? Like, I would be better at giving the step-by-step rather than figuring out exactly the detail as far as what's wrong. So the idea, though, that happens with these people is that it comes to looking at your movement. And one of the things that I do with my clients is I always wanted to make sure that we did like a movement screening. So like when we first started working together, I would look at them do like squats, push-ups, certain like deadlift motions, and things of that nature, to kind of see how the way that their body is moving, because that can help me determine two things: what muscles are weak and need to be strengthened, and what muscles are tight and need to be stretched out. And these are the most important things to understand when it comes to those injuries, right? We need to be able to, many of the times, stretch or loosen the antagonist muscles, the muscles that are of injured, or the areas around the muscles around the area that is injured, and we need to look to strengthen the opposite muscles, or the protagonist muscles, that will help build more structure and support to, let's say, like the joint or the muscle itself. So as an example, for my clients with the knees, what we ended up doing was going into situations where they would, the primary focus would be to mobilize their like quad, their hip flexors, and their calves, and look to strengthen their glutes, hamstrings, and core. And what this ultimately started to accomplish was they started to build more range of motion in their joint, because they were stretching the muscles that were tight, so their quad, their hip flexor, right, those muscles on the front, and they were strengthening the muscles on the back, the hamstrings and glutes, which then led to less mobility restrictions overall, which we know is many of the times the cause of many injuries. Because let's say you are doing squats and your squat form is incorrect because you have pressure, you have tightness of your hip flexors and knees, and then that begins to create a problem in your knees. This happens very often with jiu-jitsu folk, because, you know, let's say you're doing like knee cut style passes, or you're doing like pummel passing, and you're leading a lot with your knees. Well, then you can overdevelop and tighten the muscles of your hip flexor and quad. And then if you're not really doing any strength work on the outside of your jiu-jitsu, and you're not strengthening your hamstrings and glutes to support the joint to its fullest capacity, well, then that's going to lead to a higher probability of injury to your knees. For an example, if you were to, let's say, like hurt your shoulder, one of the main things that we're going to see when a shoulder is hurt is there's going to be tightnesses and flexibility issues and strain in like the trap region, the front delt region, the pectoral region. And we find that loosening up and stretching these areas are helpful for relieving pain, helpful for improving range of motion, which will ultimately decrease the chance of injury, because usually an injury occurs when something is pushed past its current range of motion that it has. That's many of the times an injury. Not all the time, but it is definitely a cause for many of the minor aches and pains that we can cause. And the same thing with the shoulder. If we're stretching and loosening up those front areas, those antagonist muscles, then we need to strengthen up the protagonist muscles. We need to do muscles like, we need to do exercises like reverse flies, alphabets, IYTs, face pulls, things of that nature to strengthen the lower traps, the rhomboids, the rear delts, to kind of bring everything back into a total synergy. So that's what the most important thing is. For instance, with the rib and the intercostal muscles, a big part is going to be strengthening up the core, strengthening up the lats, and continuing to mobilize rotation. So thoracic spine extension and thoracic spine rotation in order to stretch out those strained muscles. Because what happens in a strained muscle is that scar tissue starts to build, and what happens when there's a lot of scar tissue that gets built up, you then your body gets pulled into an unoptimal position. So for instance, if you have scar tissue built up in your shoulder because you tore your rotator cuff and you didn't really do mobility drills or strengthening drills to keep it loose, what then happens is you build up that scar tissue in the front, and it leaves you then permanently or almost permanently with a shoulder, with a thoracic kyphosis of shoulders rolling forward, and then eventually you get stuck in that position. If I were to, let's say, not mobilize the intercostal muscles that were strained, and I were to let scar tissue build, well, then what would happen is my body would then start to pull into more of a spinal flexion, and my body would then start to round, and then other problems can start to arise. I can start to develop lower back pain. I can start to develop shoulder pain because my shoulders are rolling forward. And that then comes back to having like a cause and effect with everything. And that's why it's important to kind of see the medical professional first, and then figure out, okay, well, what's the step-by-step for me to get clear? Because there's a cause and effect to everything, right? So if your shoulder hurts, you got to ask yourself, like, what is it that's making the shoulder hurt? Am I doing something in training that's just like stupid that I need to change, or I need to switch up? Is my posture whacked? Do I need to like fix my posture? Is that what's causing the shoulder to roll? Because then if you do all the mobility drills, you could do all the mobility drills that you want. If you don't actually fix what's causing it, which maybe could be like rolling, rounding your shoulders while you're driving in the car, well, then you're going to develop problems, because you're going to do the mobility, you're going to do the strengthening, but you're not actually correcting the cause. Like as far as the cause for the rib injury, I can honestly say, obviously, like, injuries do happen and stuff happens, but what I will say is I believe that on that given day, when I did get injured, I believe that I was very dehydrated, and I believe that I was very overtrained. I trained like 6 days in a row. I trained for like multiple hours, and I was sweating like crazy, and I didn't have any water. I didn't have any Gatorade. I don't even think I drank that much water beforehand to prepare. And I think that eventually that just kind of like caught up to me. I didn't do any stretching that day. I didn't warm up properly. And now that's the lesson learned, right? Make sure that I'm always hydrated. Make sure I got my electrolytes in me, which is, of course, very, lack of electrolytes is also very common to injuries, muscular strains, and such. And so these are things that we need to pay attention to. We need to pay attention to what is actually causing these problems. And we need to look at the habits that we can fix in order to decrease the cause, right? So if you're constantly rolling with this one person in the gym and they act like a complete spaz and they hurt you almost every time, then maybe it's a good idea to just avoid eye contact with that person and not go train with them. And then you switch those roles with somebody who is maybe a little bit lighter, or someone that actually cares for your safety and that isn't a freaking, spazatron, And then you go into a situation now where you can actually enjoy your training and not get hurt, right? Because you've learned and you've corrected yourself, and now moving forward with years to come, you're no longer just like getting injured all the time because you've corrected the cause and you've corrected like the main problem that is actually causing your injuries and causing your pain. And I think that's an important thing to notice. But, for anybody out there, on a final note, that's like going through injuries right now, I definitely understand, and there's definitely a large percentage of population that understands the injuries, and a lot of us deal with it. And I want to quickly comment on the people that kind of say, injuries are part of it, and you kind of have to just deal with it and work through it. I mean, yes and no. Like, I believe in working around things and trying to figure out what you can do that doesn't cause pain. But at the same time let's say, for instance, I were to just be a jerk off and just go and train as hard as I possibly can, and then I re-aggravate the rib. Well, I'll always be a constant state of 70%, right? I'll never be able to go to my max potential because I'm constantly just dealing with these like aches and pains. Versus if I were to take the next 4 to 6 weeks and take it seriously and make sure that I recover, well, then I fully recover, and then I can do my tournaments coming up in 3 months, right? Whereas like, no, I can't do that. Like, I have to make sure I train now. Well, then that's... Eventually, you're going to get shut down. Eventually, I won't even be able to make it to the gym. My rib will hurt so much that I won't even be able to make it, and I'll be forced to rest. And that's not where I want to be. That would make me so sad, because I know at this point, like, I can still drill, and I can still, like, keep my mind activated. And I know that if I give it good rest, I'll be fine in given time. To continue to aggravate it would be not a smart decision. So that's kind of what I really wanted to go into today. There's no shame in taking time off in order to recover and rest. But what I will say is to just keep your mind engaged. Watch tape. Keep discussing with your partners what's going on. Try to go to class and watch. Try to go to class and drill, but maybe not do live rounds. Maybe have like very light, flowy style rounds with people that you trust, and keep it more into that realm, If you guys want to check out any of the strength and conditioning that I do, everything is going to be now on Patreon. So feel free to go and support right there. And if you do, that is definitely much appreciated. And I'll send you a love letter. Just let me know when you join. Let me know if you're dealing with any injuries right now. Don't be afraid to like, comment, and subscribe, as it really helps me improve the reach that I can have with my podcast. So thanks a lot for tuning in. I hope that this was helpful and educational, and I'll see you in the next episode.